Hello, everybody. I'm Robin Etherington, and I have the distinct pleasure and honor of moderating the last panel discussion of Ontario Museum Association's fall workshop series. All of the workshops and panel discussions have been informative, insightful, and robust. And the advocacy is multifaceted, will prove to be also informative, insightful, and robust. We have three amazing colleagues and professionals as our guest speakers today. Before I go on and introduce our speakers to you, I do want to do the land acknowledgement. As an organization of provincial scope, the Ontario Museum Association recognizes that its members and community live and work on the lands and territories of Indigenous peoples. We are thankful to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples who have cared for these territories since time immemorial and who continue to contribute to all communities across the province. We acknowledge that there are more than 40 treaties and other land agreements that cover Ontario, and that the descendants and cultures of the first peoples who lived here are a vibrant and integral part of our society today. We gratefully acknowledge and deeply value the opportunity we have to learn from and cherish the contributions of Indigenous peoples of the past, present, and into the future. As we acknowledge the colonial legacy of museums, we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of truth and reconciliation and collaboration. As we participate in this gathering, we invite you to reflect on the land that you are on, who the traditional keepers of the land are, what the treaty relationship is, and if it is unceded territory. I am in Ottawa, the traditional and unceded land of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I am grateful for having been able to work with them on projects at the Bytown Museum and elsewhere. Now, thank you very much for that. I know that because of COVID, during COVID, after COVID, we have become real pros at Zoom lectures, meetings, conferences, etc. But just to sum up some things, just to make sure that all of you are seeing the screen, the participants, etc. If you have a question, please, and I hope you have many questions about this very all-important topic of advocacy, please place them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you want to say hello to a friend and colleague who's on this Zoom meeting, please have that conversation in the chat box. If you have a technical problem, put it in the chat box. The OMA staff are monitoring all of the input in both the Q&A and the chat boxes, and they will be more than happy to help you if you have a technical problem. This, as I said, is an all-important conversation about advocacy. Advocacy is so important for all museums, galleries, and heritage organizations in today's current economy and social environment. It is important to continually advocate with all three levels of government, not only for an enhanced funding model, but also for political support and acknowledgement of everything museums and galleries and heritage organizations do for their communities, for their provinces, and for that matter, for Canada at large. However, advocacy is multifaceted, very complex, very complicated. It also entails museums advocating for their community's well-being, for diversity and inclusion, for truth and reconciliation. Participants will speak to the aspect of building relationships as part of advocacy, to communications, the message, and the way the message is delivered and to whom it is delivered, because they are all essential to successful advocacy. And working with and for your communities affords everyone an opportunity to take ownership of their advocacy efforts. Now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our three amazing panelists. And I know most of you know most of our panelists, but I will introduce you nonetheless. Sarah McKenzie is the executive director of the Ottawa Museums Network, which is a very vibrant museum network in the Ottawa area, both for city museums and community museums. And she has been with us since July of 2021. She is an experienced executive and communications professional with over 23 years experience with the federal public service, most recently as Director General of Strategic Communications for Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada. She has an extensive background in strategic and risk communications, media relations, and digital engagement. Sarah has directed several successful national public education and marketing campaigns. She has a BA in history from Ottawa University and volunteers her time on several boards of cultural and heritage organizations. And today I just found out she's a craftswoman. She does amazing crafts. So there you go. That's just an add-on. Michael Wrigley Lancaster was born and raised in Chatham, Ontario, and has been the executive director curator of the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum, which I've had the pleasure of visiting a number of times, since 2007. He studied fine arts at Fanshawe College in London, Ontario, before receiving a diploma in applied museum studies from Algonquin College in Ottawa. He started as a summer volunteer for the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum, then becoming assistant curator at Diefenbunker, Canada's Cold War Museum, followed by program coordinator for Young Canada Works in heritage organizations at the Canadian Museums Association. Paving the way for more safe museum spaces, Michael has empowered the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum to become Canada's first rainbow registered museum and pioneered the proclamation of Pride Month within Mississippi Mills. Michael also strives for inclusivity and diversity of the sector within his involvement in local municipal committees and the Ontario Museum Association's Executive Council. Michael is vice president of the OMA board. Michael is a proud member of the 2S LGBTQ1A+ community. So thank you, Michael, for being with us today. Heather George is the executive director of the Woodland Cultural Center and is vice president of the Canadian Museum Association's board. Previously, Ms. George had been working with the center for a year and a half as guest curator while on leave from a position as curator of Indigenous histories at the Canadian Museum of History. In addition to her curatorial and executive skills, Heather is a PhD candidate at the University of Waterloo and brings strong research background to her role. Much of her personal and professional work has been directed at gaining a better understanding of the culture of her nation. Her current research examines the historical and philosophical underpinnings of her nation, but also of Indigenous peoples' culture throughout Canada. In addition, and this is an add-on, Heather has just been nominated for the 2023 Premier's Award. And she's multitasking today because she is hosting the Indigenous Futures in Public Galleries and Museums at the Woodland Cultural Center today, November the 30th. So thank you, Heather, very much for multitasking and being with us today. Much, much appreciated. Michael, would you like to start us off with your presentation? And thank you very much again for being with us, Michael.
I'll start off here with Advocacy is Multi-Faceted. My name is Michael Reichley Lancaster. My pronouns are he, him. I am a white cis male, and because of that, I have privilege. Outside of that, I am gay and have 2 non-visible disabilities. I'm proud to acknowledge that the sacred land on which the museum is located has been a site of human activity for time immemorial and is rich in Indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We are grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for this land and water in order that we might meet here today. Before settlers arrived, the territory was subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, on agreement between Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee nations to peaceably share and care for resources after settlers arrived. It became subject to the 3-figure wampum belt, last carried by Algonquin Elder William Commanda. What does community mean to you? I wanted to start with a little share screen and that you can put responses in. I'd love to hear what everyone thinks community, or what community means to them, and think of themselves in their community. What does it mean? And you'll see words starting to pop up: to inspire.
Yes, I'm not sure if people have used Mentimeter before, but there is a link in the chat there to menti.com, and from there you're able to input the access code that will allow you to connect directly to the presentation. So hopefully that's an easy way for people to find their way to the presentation. Let us know if there's any challenges.
Yeah, I'm loving these responses. Belonging is very great, and support and togetherness. Similar identities, very good. Shared values, social fabric, excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. What are some of the ones that stand out the most? I think we've got some very good ones here, largest being support, and then belonging and connection, and then shared values and understanding. It's all very good, and this definitely leads right into the next slide. So I'll move to that. And then so I want to then move into another one where we do the same thing again, but this time look at, what does advocacy mean to you? Support is definitely coming up there large, and collaboration. That's great. And I like seeing strength and awareness, amplifying voices. This is excellent. This is going to jump perfectly right into the rest of my presentation, where I'm going to take everyone on a little journey of some advocacy we've done here, and some of the positives that have come from that. So I can move along to the next slide. Thank you, everyone. That's great. Social justice. I love it. Giving space, supporting one another, and listening to each other. Phenomenal. Thank you. So I'm taking on a little bit of a journey, and some may have seen and heard of this before, and I try and present it in different ways that relate. So in July of 2019 was the first time that we at the museum, the staff, put up a rainbow flag outside the museum. The flag flew for almost a year without any incident. A few minor comments, mostly people saying how welcome they felt and excited to be able to come in the museum and feel welcomed. Then mid-June 2020, the flag and the pole were found in a neighboring park. And it was really disheartening because the flag was actually torn and shred quite significantly. And we took it very seriously and contacted police right away. And we were, honestly, the staff were feeling quite safe in the fact that we were in lockdowns and could keep our doors locked because we felt unsafe. That kind of hate doesn't belong. And it was very, very shocking and disappointing to us that someone would go to those lengths. They'd have to get up on like the back of a truck or a ladder or something to get at it even. So it was very surprising to us that someone would have that much determination and willpower to make that happen. So from that, many things happened. We got the police involved. Serious reports were done. They did do a lot of searching, trying to find, and they did find video footage of people in the park, but it wasn't crisp enough for them to determine who they were. There was certainly a lot of work done, and I commended the police for the work they were attempting to do and trying to find. But then it also kind of moved into a lot of positive advocacy in our community and positive shows of support. So many things happen, and I'll kind of walk you through several of those things throughout my presentation here. But what happened was the community just rallied. After the flag came down, the community just pulled together. A young couple in the town did a GoFundMe to raise money to replace the flag. In the end, they probably got about 100 flags. They raised such a good amount from that GoFundMe and had to eventually shut it down fairly quickly because they were going to get way too much money in, which was very exciting to see. And when doing that, it just ended up being that we were getting calls continuously saying, can we have a flag? Can we have a flag? Can we have one to show solidarity? So our community became immersed in rainbow flags. Most of the businesses in our downtown core of our small town had flags up, and it was just so empowering, invigorating to see these flags and stickers in windows, etc., of people showing that solidarity for our organization and for that hate. So it was just so very empowering in a quick, short turnaround, because we felt unsafe for maybe a day, and then it just turned around so quickly. And within that, many other things happened, and immediate things of our mayor stepping up. She's the one in the image to the immediate right, along with our recently formed Pride committee, Pride Mississippi Mills. So she did a proclamation, but also did a presentation about, or an acknowledgement of how hate doesn't belong in our community. And stepped up immediately and went into action, and now it's moved into some really good engagement between Pride and the 2SLGI+ community and the municipal government. Then extremely within a week after, a couple reached out to me saying, the one gentleman, Andy, reached out saying, I'm so heartbroken that this happened. I grew up in this community. I had challenges growing up in this community, being a gay man and a gay youth. And so as a protest, but also because my partner and I would like to get married, we want to get married in front of the museum where the flag came down. And so they arranged it all. The one gentleman that got married, Andy, he's part Indigenous, and his partner is Jewish, and it was just a magic experience. And they really made a great positive protest / just love, but also just that show of solidarity, show of positivity, and show that no, hate doesn't belong here, love belongs here. So it was a phenomenal experience, and to be a part of that. And then they did horse and buggy and marched through town on the horse and buggy with pride flags. And I got all the store owners to come out and applaud them as they went by, and they were shocked and pleased. And it ended up being such a positive experience. There was no negativity, no negative protests or anything. So that was a very positive follow-up from that, and just showcase of love wins. So very exciting. And I'm proud of our museum for taking these positive stances. And it wasn't even really meant to happen. It was just putting a flag up and thinking, okay, well, this just shows that we're welcoming for everyone. And it turned into something that became very hot topic, and it made us really move forward. And I'm proud of our community for what we've done. Then not long after that, there was a Black Lives Matter hate incident in our community as well. I think it was amazing to see how much negative things were happening in the community. So what happened was, there was a woman who works at our local retirement home, and as she would pass one house every day walking to work and walking home, she'd get the N-word flung at her every time. And so the community got word of that, and 700 people gathered and followed her walking to work one day and then walking back. What an empowering show of solidarity and support for her. And shame on the people that were doing that to her. So it was a really good show. It wasn't the museum that organized it, but we definitely took part in it, in the march, and showing that solidarity. And I think it's important for us to do that. And as Robin had mentioned, then we decided, well, let's try this Rainbow Register thing. We kept getting emails about it. We're like, what is this? Let's try this out. So we started the process, and we became the first Rainbow Registered museum gallery in Canada, to our pleasant surprise, with the advocacy and the work we were doing. And we're so proud of that and want to keep that momentum going. And there's so much more to do in all aspects of advocacy, and how museums, I feel, can be leaders in advocating for positivity and community, and going against hate. So this is starting to bleed into our exhibitions as well, and we're starting to change narratives in our exhibitions. It's taking time. There's definitely no rush in it. We're engaged with many community members, and it's a part of our new strategic plan as well, is that engagement and connecting with our Indigenous elder of our region, starting slow conversations on how we can change narratives and actually tell truth. Some say museums are the most trusted. I think that's false. I think we need to become the most trusted. If we're not telling the full community stories, we're not doing our job. So it's first, we're starting to connect with our Indigenous community, and then we're also starting a BIPOC working group that just starts discussions, and hopefully the idea is it'll work into how do we change narratives, how do we move forward in that way, and also working with our Pride community. Well, what can you do and your museum do to advocate for your community? And that's something I'm not looking for answers. It's just not, think about it. Think about what you can do and what is your community. I think it's easy to forget and hold on to one narrative. I think there's so much more richness in our communities with even recent immigration, just so many things, and doing oral histories and getting people's current stories, because that does relate to history. And it's so important that they then feel a part of your community, a part of your museum, and have that buy-in and want to get involved. It's so rewarding. Another rewarding part not long after too was about a year after the flag had come down. We advocated for our municipality to do 3 Rainbow Progress Pride crosswalks in each of our community regions within our municipality. And it was just a phenomenal experience. However, it was also a challenge. And the challenge really came in like the next day. There were skid marks all over it. And people try in the community to say, oh, it wasn't intentional. We know it was. People will do that. They just think it's ridiculous that we have to have these. We had lots of negative comments on social media. Well, what about this community? Why isn't this community get a crosswalk? Why is it just that community? It was very interesting, but I liked that it was opening dialogue. And we never, as a pride group and as a museum, never had to stand up and defend it, because the community defended it themselves on social media. People just called people out and said, no, there's a reason for this, and this is why. And so it was really exciting to see community stepping up and understanding that. And now it's even grown even more that every year our municipal council and management staff of our municipality are getting diversity and inclusion training. And they want updated training every year. And they want to ensure that they're moving forward and growing with the community and with the community's needs. And it's just so exciting. And it also has grown into that we now have a Lanark County-wide Pride group that's doing even bigger initiatives throughout our county. And I think we can do so much more the more we work together with our multifaceted community members. So I just want to say thank you. That's my presentation. I think I'm going to leave you with a couple of final last words. I hope I haven't gone too long. My closing was that one of my volunteers recently had a visitor come through. They toured the full museum. And at the end, they came up to him and said, thank you. I can bring my child here. It's a safe space. That my volunteer just came to me and said, she was almost in tears. She said, I'm so glad we're doing what we're doing, that we're making this a safe space. And these are the kind of comments we get far more often than any negative. It is people saying, I'm included. Because I want to see a better place than when I was brought up. And I did not see anything that was 2S LGBTQI+, BIPOC in museums. It has been colonial, it has been white and straight. And I want to see more of everyone in museums, so you feel and know that you are a part of the community.
Thank you, Michael. That was very powerful, and it also demonstrates that museums are leaders in advocacy for their communities and can actually make change. So thank you very much. And on that note, I'm going to move over to another change maker, Heather George. And Heather, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Robin. And thanks, Michael and Sarah and everybody at OMA. Hopefully I didn't cause you too much stress, just like logging on at the last minute there. I am double dutying this. For all of you out there in museum world, I know you're all very familiar with this as well. So we've just popped into the chat a link to the presentation. So I'm also going to share my screen. I'm not as interactive as Michael, so there's only one slide for you at the end, but it's a goodie. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how to use social media as a form of advocacy and community building. This one's a little bit technical, but I will try and throw in some more fun, real examples as I go. But I did want to hopefully give people a little bit of the background knowledge and skills that you need to do this work. I will say, for me, a lot of realizing the power of social media has come through practice, not because I'm any sort of expert. So I'm learning right alongside all of you. But I do think that social media is a really important tool, especially for those of us who have been marginalized or made invisible. And I really want to give a big shout out to a good friend of mine, someone you may all know, Armando Perla, who is the curator now at the Textile Museum in Toronto, because Armando was the person who really pushed me to become more visible on social media, reminding me of Audra Lord's good work. And I'll get to that in a minute as well. So I wanted to cover a few things in the time that we have. I want to talk a bit about what is your story, branding and style, style being very important, as you can tell, platforms and algorithms and how those actually work, and some basic tips, just because I know some of us are working with really small organizations. Maybe you are the everything, including the person cleaning the bathrooms. I've been there. I've written grants for bathrooms. So you're not alone. And I realize that some of this, depending on the size of the museum you're at, we'll look for some of the tips that'll help you to do things more easily so that you don't have to spend so much time on this if you don't have someone dedicated to it. Thinking about what a social media plan could actually entail, and then the activity part at the end, which is how we can support each other right now in this session and going forward. So what is your story? So one of the really important things that my predecessor left me with, Janice Montour, is that residential schools are not our history. They're something that was done to us. And so where I work at Woodland Cultural Center, we are the site of the Mohawk Institute, which was the longest running residential school in Canadian history. Two of my family members were brought to this residential school. And pretty well, I would say like 98% of our staff have family that were impacted by this. 57 different communities had their children removed and brought to this site from Ontario, Quebec, and out into Manitoba. And also we do know that there were deaths that occurred at our site based on archival records. A group called the Survivor Secretariat are doing a lot of this research, and the ground penetrating radar on our site. So it's really important that we balance this narrative where we talk about things like genocide, along with a narrative that is based on the idea of cultural continuity and vibrancy. And those are two very, very different stories. If we were doing an exhibit with a big idea, I think people would be really worried about it. But we do it by having two different buildings, and we do it through our exhibition content, and then also through our social media platforms. Sometimes we really are talking about residential schools, and sometimes we are talking about smoke dance competitions, and both of those things can exist at the same time. I think it's okay for us to understand that human beings are complicated and our history is complicated. And to acknowledge that in our work in museums is really important. Our public is smart enough to understand that. We just need to actually make sure we make room for more than one narrative. The museum section of our building was established in October of 1972, although really had been a year's worth of discussions and conversations from 1971. Basically, as soon as the residential school building closed, these conversations started. And we originally were focusing on collecting and researching related to material culture and belongings, and developing a library and museum. And then, of course, we added in a language department. At one point, there was like a black room here, a photography studio, print shop. We don't have those last two anymore. And then Glenn Crane decided that we needed more contemporary Indigenous art as well, right, as part of balancing this narrative. And so he started an annual exhibition, a juried art show that was called Indian Art, but because we know terminology changes, we've been also called First Nations Art, and now it's called Indigenous Art. It's the longest running show of its kind. It's juried by Indigenous people. It features all Indigenous artists at any point in their career working in any medium. And so it's a really powerful show, and a lot of other museums and galleries rely on this show to acquire pieces for their collection. So it's also a good opportunity for those young and emerging artists to have their work seen where they might not otherwise be seen. Even just putting together an exhibition and bringing in an artist who's never been seen before and making that space, it can be a very radical act. And I'm starting to learn more about the difference between the gallery world and the museum world, and there are a few differences. And so really starting to break down some of those hierarchies, which is what Woodland has always been really good at. So then what is your story? So this is you as an individual. Not everybody is comfortable with this, and I totally respect that. But for some of us, our identity is what we have with us every day, and it's not a 9 to 5, and we don't walk away from this. And if you have the space, the emotional capacity, the interest in doing this, I think you as an individual, as a leader in this sector, as someone who cares about your community, otherwise, why would you do this work? You are very powerful as well. And so how does your personal story fit or align with your organization? The personal connections and experiences you have make your organization more relatable and accessible to the public. Sometimes the thing that is hardest for you to talk about is actually the thing that makes you the most relatable to other people. We all want to wear this mask of professionalism, and certainly I don't think we should stop being professional, but I think that we also need to be accessible, and being accessible sometimes means bearing those hard parts of who you are that maybe you don't really feel super comfortable in people knowing that, I don't know, you wear socks to sleep in at night or something. I hate when my feet are cold. But that's what makes you really human to people. As an individual, you need to be your biggest champion, even if it feels icky. And that's something that Armando taught me. So now you'll see me all over LinkedIn and social media if you follow me. And I talk a lot about the things that I'm working on, about the amazing experiences that I'm having, about the people I'm meeting and the amazing work that they're doing. And part of that is because, especially when you work in really big organizations, if they don't necessarily like the work that you're doing, or it doesn't necessarily match with what they think you should be doing, they won't put it out there. They will put it out there when they like what you're doing, when it makes them look good, when they've hired their first Indigenous curator, but not when they've let that first Indigenous curator go with an NDA. Certain galleries recently have been doing that. And so if that's how the reality of how big institutions work, we need to champion ourselves and the work that we're doing, even when it feels kind of gross and icky. Be a champion to others. So if other people are doing good work and it's not necessarily the work of your institution, that's okay. Put it out there anyway. Like, let's celebrate each other, because this work is hard. And so we need to have these moments where we do get to celebrate as well, not always just be critical. I'm a very critical person, as you can tell, but I still want to champion the cool things that other people are doing and be brave and authentic. So like I said, be yourself. And this is where another one of the things, I feel like this whole thing is like a shout out to Armando in some ways, but I've learned so much from him. And he was the one that, really, and this is sad to say, woke me up to Audre Lorde. I'm sure lots of you out there are like, oh my gosh, Heather, come on, as if you weren't reading Audre Lorde. But I was reading a lot of Indigenous content, and that's kind of it. So I needed to branch out. And she says, "My silences had not protected me. Your silence will not protect you. But for every real word spoken, for every attempt I had ever made to speak those truths for which I am still seeking, I had made contact with other women while we examined the words to fit in a world in which we all believed bridged our differences. And it was the concern and caring of these women which gave me the strength and enabled me to scrutinize the essentials of my living." So for every person that I make angry, that sends me nasty things on a listserv, 10 other people message me and tell me how grateful they are that I said what I did. And so that's okay. I can take those statistics. I will take those 10 people every day over the one. The hardest part is the people that message me and say, I had to leave an institution too, and I can't talk about it because they made me sign an NDA. And, I had whatever pressures at home, I had responsibilities. And so I had to sign that NDA. I couldn't just go out and say something. And that's the hardest, because all those people, obviously, I have to keep confidential, and their stories never get told. So there are still some silences. And I think it's really important that we're all aware of that. For every person who actually speaks out, in my case, there's 20 other people that I've heard from in the last 2 years who didn't say anything when they left the sector or were forced out. So down to some of the actual nuts and bolts of this. Do you have a social media policy? It's a good thing to have in place, especially if you're in a larger organization and you have multiple employees and you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And how you deal with corporate versus personal social media. This is something I really appreciated when I worked with City of Hamilton. Big organization, right? And they had all of us just put like a little disclaimer on all of our social media that said that our views represented our own views and not necessarily that of our organization. Of course, that comes with its own underlying disclaimer that nobody ever says, which is, if you still say something really bad about your organization, or if you say something that causes them to hear from other people, you're still going to have to carry that pressure. So be aware of that. Think about what your capacity is for taking that on and whether you feel like you can. Definitely be a champion for your organization. We've gotten, I think, much better at it here with, we do have someone that does our media, but she also does all of our development. She's very busy. So really making sure that everybody else in the organization reposts things, comments on things, does the things that are needed to get our message out there. And if you aren't well versed on a topic, you can turn to someone who is, pay them a small honorarium, get them to do a takeover for the day of your social media platform. And it's not that you're turning over responsibility or delegating that away. It's that you're saying, you know what, we're not experts on everything. That's why we have guest curators. You can also have someone guest curate part of your social media, right? So that you, even if you don't feel comfortable speaking to someone, you're finding someone who is knowledgeable about that topic. The basics of the @ symbol and what used to be called a pound and is now a hashtag. It's important to understand these two symbols. So ats are like if you're saying @Heather George, and it's going to flag me that you've put my name in a post or an organization's name in a post. Hashtags are how most social media functions in terms of finding things. And so if you want the thing that you're posting to be associated with museums, then you want hashtag museums. Hashtag glam sector, which is a new learning for me, because guess what? Hashtag glam gets you a bunch of people that are doing stuff with makeup, which is cool too. But hashtag glam sector in Google will bring you up all museum stuff. So that's a good one to just use sort of across the board, right? And then create your own branded hashtag. So hashtag Woodland Cultural Center, hashtag Indigenous Art, whatever it is, and use that so that people know that that's what they should be using as well, whether it's for an event or whether it's just like across the board for all of your posts. Consistency and timing is important. So it's important to post fairly regularly, even if that's just once a week. And then checking out when your posts are doing well. And I'll get to that in a minute about how you can do that. But according to the LinkedIn statistics, 1 o'clock on Monday is when all of us are checking our LinkedIn profiles. So for LinkedIn, for example, that's a really good time to be posting just across the board generally. Thinking about descriptive text or alt text. This is something I have to say I have to get a lot better at. Like I said, I'm learning too. But if you're posting an image where there is text in the image and you don't also put that text actually in the description where you write text, then that can't be read by most programs that are reading text for people. Same like if you want to describe what's actually in the image, right? That's very useful. And then the echo chamber effect, I did want to flag that for all of us. You've probably all got it on, if you're on Facebook for sure, because you tend to follow people that have content that's related to what you're interested in, and also what your political and social standings are. So guess what? Not everybody thinks the same way that you do. So just keep that in the back of your mind too, that when you're doing social media, you probably are in a bit of an echo chamber. So it's good to look and see what else is out there, even if it's not something that you're going to engage with personally or regularly. It is helpful to know what other people are doing. I would say the best example of this for me is the platform Reddit, because Reddit is like such a dumpster fire sometimes, really terrible, awful, like human rights violation level stuff on it. But at the same time, it has a lot of just sort of, they went with the model like anybody can say anything, which we all know where that leads us. But it is helpful if you're trying to find out what other people are talking about. Just so, as we all know, knowledge has some power behind it, and it prepares us when we come across some of the lesser enjoyable conversations. Okay, so here's some statistics for you. This is real fun. This is where it gets really technical. So I really wanted to kind of, and this is just like me being like, oh, I need to understand this for everybody else. I better get into it. So certainly for me, personally, and then also at Woodland, like Facebook and Instagram are our two biggest things that we use the most. I, like maybe some of you, decided I was like so over Elon Musk that I stopped using Twitter. That being said, there's still a lot of media outlets that use what is now X. And so if you're trying to get noticed by news outlets like newspapers, it is still a little bit useful, I'm sorry to say. Each of the platforms has different ways of sharing information. Which is sort of what I've outlined here. So, you know, Facebook is primarily like 18 to 34-year-olds, and it has 2.95 billion monthly active users. They're not all going to see your posts, hate to tell you that. But what goes over really well on Facebook is video content shot in a vertical. So hold your phone like this, not like this when you're doing your videos. And the big thing is you really want people to comment, share, or you want them to react beyond a thumbs up. So it's ideal if you can get them to like engage in terms of like a heart emoji or any of those other little emojis that come up in a post. But most of these platforms don't love if you actually put right in your post, like, give us a heart, give us a like they kind of flag that. So don't just like get out there and be telling people that they need to engage with your content. That doesn't work super well. Instagram can be connected to Facebook. So this is one of the ways that you can save yourself some time. If you're a small organization, your posts on Instagram can automatically show up on your Facebook account. You just have to make sure that anybody that you've tagged in your post is tagged properly on Facebook, because sometimes people use different tags or names on different platforms. And so that can kind of mess with that transfer of posts. And I think I forgot to mention that, but check what your social medias are set to and whether you have the same so that that I mentioned, like at Woodland Cultural Center, check and see if it's the same across all platforms. And ideally, if you can, change it so it is the same, because that'll help people find you more easily as well, instead of having like, oh, this is what we are on Instagram, this is what we are on Facebook, this is what we are on LinkedIn. It's better if you can have all one. Yeah, I said, oh yeah, making sure the ads are the same, making sure I'm on time. I already said about the news stuff. Academics still seem to use X a lot as part of their social engagement. What else? Oh yes, other platforms. There's more, but wait, there's more. TikTok, I'm not on it. I will never be on it. I refuse to be on it, but a lot of people use TikTok and post it onto other platforms. So that's something you can think about, right? How can you use your content for more than one platform? It's got interesting statistics in terms of who's on there. And you can do video content up to 10 minutes long. So if you're looking to produce longer video content, you can, but here's the catch on that. If you produce longer video content and people don't watch the content to the end, the algorithms on most of social media platforms will flag that. And they say, you know what, this is less relevant because people are watching it for like 10 seconds and then they're moving on. So be a little bit cautious about that. Again, you can get that echo chamber with TikTok. The things that are really popular right now in terms of trends on TikTok are dance challenges, big surprise, and ASMR videos. And I feel like both of these things are things that museums can do really, really well. About, I think 10 years ago, there was something called #museum dance off. And if you look that up on YouTube, you can find me dancing inside a giant steam engine. We did that competition with City of Hamilton, and it was super, super fun. And we like came in second in North America, and it's probably the most social media engagement that that museum had ever had. And I mean, I will say it was heavily scripted, but you know, if you're like someone who likes dancing, again, be accessible, right? Be a real person, not just this like elitist like director of a museum. I'm not saying that the work that we do isn't hard. It is, but it's still good to be accessible. And ASMR, oh my goodness, think of all the things in your collection that are interesting fabrics and textiles. And like if you're opening something, the sound of it opening, right? You could do some cool things with this. And it doesn't take long. LinkedIn is probably many of you are aware, is a favorite platform of mine. I like that it's an opportunity to share things that are more related to professional development, and sort of like where things are going in our sector and have those conversations. It really looks at how people from your sector are engaging with your posts, the algorithms. And sorry for those of you that don't know, algorithms are these like weird black boxes of programming that lots of programmers don't even necessarily understand how it works, but it's the thing that decides whether your content is relevant or not and whether it should be lifted up within a platform and shown to people. It's really important with LinkedIn to understand that a post with an image gets twice as many comments. And remember, comments are one of the ways that the algorithm figures out if your content is good. And videos get 5 times the amount of engagement. So it really is important to think about photos and videos and how you use those, not just text. Also with this, it's important to tag people and companies. Most of these social media platform important to think about what your keywords are and how accurate and relevant your hashtags are. And like I said, 1 o'clock on Monday, that's when everybody's having that slump after lunch and they are checking their LinkedIn, not working on their budget. And then YouTube, I'm so sorry, doing this a bit last minute, forgot to look up the statistics, but you can Google it. You all have the power to do that. The videos, of course, for YouTube are quite a bit longer. This isn't as much of a social media, but I still think it's an important platform for us to think about in terms of sharing content with educators and with the public. And they have a new format called YouTube Shorts, which again are filmed in this direction so that you can use it on TikTok or YouTube or Instagram. And it's more usable cross platforms, which is good if you're a small organization and you're the one person doing this plus cleaning the bathroom and giving the tours. Okay, I gotta speed this up. Things to think about. ChatGPT, I know we're all like, oh my God, AI, not actually a terrible platform. It's really good as an editor, and it also will tell you what popular topics are on social media right now. Make yourself a calendar and pay attention to what's going on in the news in terms of what your posts are about. Research the hashtags, keep a library of your content. Think about an analytics platform, especially if you're the only one doing this work. Google is actually free, Google Analytics. Look for opportunities for cross promotion and push for them. This is an important one. This is the way we can be advocates for each other in the sector, is that when you're working with another organization, make sure that they are actually adding you in their posts, right? So that your organization is getting flagged as well, or the community group you're working with is getting flagged as well. And Hootsuite Labs has a whole bunch of videos that are really awesome that will teach you more about social media and what's best to do on what platforms. Okay, yay. Interactive. This is really important. This part is really, really important. National Park Service in the US, by the way, if you haven't looked at their social media, please, please do. It is funny and it is engaging and it is like the best social media content I have ever seen. And their role is to do environmental work, right? It's not like they don't have a really serious job. They have an incredibly serious job, but they still make it fun and engaging. And this one is this poor bison that stepped on some Lego. We all know what that feels like. Not good. So I'm hoping that those of you who have the number, the code to get into Mentimeter that was popped in the chat earlier, if you can head over to that, and it should give you the opportunity to put your either your organization up here on the screen or hashtags like hashtag glam sector that you've been using so that we can all follow each other and we can engage with each other's content. So we'll see how this goes, and I'll just like talk, and hopefully the technology works while people are doing this and responding. What else should I tell you about in social media world? Oh yeah, this is a really powerful tool. Social media is a tool, like I said, that many, many marginalized communities use because it is an opportunity to get your content out. It doesn't cost a lot beyond, obviously, time, although you can pay for advertising on things like Facebook. And I think it's one of the ways that we as organizations can uplift the work of other organizations and community groups around us. So this is why I really, really like social media in terms of doing this type of work. It also, if you're working with community groups that aren't sort of like normally who you engage with, I think it doesn't just show that you support them, but it also helps to break down some of that echo chamber, right? So woohoo, these are people I'm going to be following. Put yourself up there if you want me to follow you. And one of the things I wanted to speak to as well while we're at this, people have said that I'm an activist and they've said that I'm radical, and I'm neither of those things. Being an Indigenous person working in the museum sector is really like not a common thing. And I didn't create the Indian Act. The laws and structures and policies that create inequity mean that some of us look like we're radical and they look like we're activists, and we're not. We're really just pointing out those inequities that other people don't have to be aware of because the system works for them, because it was made by people like them for them. And so it's not actually a compliment to say that I'm an activist at all. I'm not being an activist. I'm just out here telling you the things that are negatively impacting my community and hoping that you will see those things and do something about it. I also wanted to say that, my existence, and this is something I think was not a favorite joke when I was at Canadian Museum of History, but it was kind of true. So when you work for Crown Corporation, you have to sign an agreement basically saying that like it's a conflict of interest, right? Like you're not going to engage in conflict of interest, and you do it for all sorts of things. But I really, really wanted to put on there that my existence was at conflict with the Crown, which is like funny and also super not funny and makes people feel really awkward. So sorry to anyone who's watching this from CMH that I made feel awkward while I was there. But it's true, right? Indigenous people aren't supposed to exist. That's not the point of the Indian Act. The point of the Indian Act was to get rid of us. And at that time, really for settlement, right? So that everybody else could have access to land and resources. And so my existence is at conflict with the Crown. Maybe not the Crown now. I hope not the Crown now. But as long as Indigenous people are here, we will always have that challenge, that dichotomy, and we're not going away. So we're always going to have that challenge to deal with. Amazing. I need to screen capture this. 1 minute. Control, print screen. There we go. Now I've got them all. Thanks, everyone. So I'm just about out of time. I don't know how Mississippi Valley Textile Museum, you got your thing permanently up there. I don't know if it looks like that for you guys. What? Michael is just making stamps on things. You will know us, you will see us. And I'm totally cool with that. I'm here for it. So the other thing I wanted to mention, the last point I have, is that a strong online community requires a strong in-person community. You can't just build your networks through social media. Social media can uplift those networks for sure. It can uplift that work of, I guess we can say advocacy, but really community building is what we're talking about. Get out there, go to other people's events, go hang out with them. It's not a 9 to 5. That's how people really know that you care about them. And it's also how you build these networks. And then you can amplify that through your social media. My email's there. I'm kind of okay with Textile Valley being over top of it because honestly, my email is a mess. So you're much better off to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you're looking to connect and send me a message there. We probably don't have a lot more opportunities for collaboration at Woodland at the moment, unless you're interested in hearing about our exhibition calendar and supporting an exhibition we're already planning on doing. But I'm always here for you and to champion you and to have these hard conversations. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm looking forward to what you have to say, Sarah.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Heather. That was a very deep and vast conversation about how social media is a tool for advocacy and community development. So thank you very, very much, Heather. And on that note, it's a great segue to Sarah Mackenzie's talk. So it's all yours, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I share my screen successfully? Excellent. Thank you so much. Just thank you to my colleagues who already spoke. Michael, you gave me some goosebumps there. I have faith that hopefully what you're doing in your community will spread throughout the Ottawa Valley, because I've seen a lot of hate from in the Ottawa Valley, and that's where I'm from, and it makes me sad. And Heather, I'm the hugest fangirl of Armando's social media, and I follow you as well, but watching him around the world and his fashion and everything, it's just so cool. So I'm a huge fan of that. So today I was going to speak about communications and advocacy, and specifically advocacy with decision makers and influencers, and the importance of communications in that kind of role. So one of the reasons I propose this angle is because I've been on both sides. I've been advocating for the Ottawa Museum Network for a couple of years with both municipal and federal and provincial governments. But before that, as you heard from my bio, I was in the public service. I was part of many, many meetings where delegations came in from different sectors and organizations from all over the place, advocating and lobbying things with the government. So I pulled together kind of this tool that I'm going to share with you today, these tips and advice, because my experience has been that there's a need for this information. There's a need in the sector, to strengthen your advocacy efforts through some really good communications. So a few caveats just before I go into this is that some of the advice you may have heard today already before, but I think that there'll be some takeaways for sure that you can take back and apply. My tips today aren't for every situation. I'm really talking about more that formal engagement with members of parliament and others, but some of the tips absolutely can be used everywhere else. And I just wanted to say too that, finally, you're not going to find tips. I'm not doing tips today on communication channels. I think Heather did a fantastic job covering that off for social media. And there's so many different tactics that you can do from a communication perspective, from letter writing to social media to all kinds of traditional media. But I'm going to talk about the crafting the right message, how to deliver it, and make it memorable so that when you leave the room, they're going to remember what you've said. So I'm going to walk you through those tips, and you get to witness my remarkable Canva and Prezi skills. So if you are not using Canva, this is an amazing tool for small organizations who don't have graphic designers on staff. I was able to do this myself, and I've never taken graphic design in my life. So I'm going to let you see what I've come up with. So helpful hints and tips for effective advocacy communications. My main message in the start of all this is that strong, focused, consistent communications is essential to achieving results. And poor planning can damage your credibility and reputation and result in missed opportunities. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. The first, advice that I have for people is prepare. When you're prepared, you come across as more confident. Don't advocate without preparing. I know that there are people out there advocating that have such a wealth of knowledge, and they're experts in the field and they know a lot, but still have to prepare. You need to understand not only that if you don't understand the pressing need of an issue, pressing need or issue in detail, you're going to have a difficult time expressing that and making the person that you're advocating to understand it as well. So do your research, and as part of that research, assembling the supporting evidence and facts and figures, and I'll get to the importance of that later. It's also really, really important that not just what the general public says, but what do the detractors say about your issue? And are you meeting with a detractor, or are you meeting with a supporter, or are you meeting with somebody that's more neutral? It's really important to try to understand that before you go into an advocacy situation. Also, this is something I think a lot of people forget to do, is prepare for those follow-up questions. There will be follow-up questions, and if you're dealing with a detractor, they're going to put you on the spot. So, just like you're preparing to, say, appear at a news conference or, a live media event, that reporters are going to ask you tough questions. So you prepare, you anticipate those questions, you prepare the answers, and you're able to, drive that conversation in the direction that you want to drive it to. And finally, practice out loud. I know that might sound silly to some people, but I even practiced this out loud this morning before I came on to make sure that, I felt comfortable in what I was presenting and it comes across more confident. Determining your ask is also so important. And you need to hone in precisely what are you advocating for? Is it more funding? Is it a policy change? Is it inclusion? What are you trying to achieve and why? And you need to pull all that together into, a clear, concise call to action and messaging so that you can clearly communicate that to the people you're talking to. The people that you're talking to may be new to their role. They may not have any knowledge of, the heritage sector if you're meeting with maybe a senator from somewhere. But it is really important to be clear and concise, okay? And I'm going to come back a little bit more to when you're crafting that message, what that means. Knowing your audience, this is something all communicators always talk about, but it's really important because it helps you craft your message and your approach. So knowing who you are advocating to, is it a decision maker? Is it an influencer? Is it a supporter? Is it a detractor? If you can determine some of that up front, you're going to be more successful in your meeting with them. So where do they stand on the issues you are going in to advocate for is really important. So what issues and policies have they publicly supported? That's really good to know, because if they are a supporter, you're probably going to get a lot farther in your advocacy than with a detractor. Also, kind of make a profile of those who you're advocating to. I like to do that, it doesn't have to be formal, but just do that little bit of research to figure out, okay, how am I going to connect with this person? How am I going to make my message resonate? And how am I actually going to move the bar in what I'm trying to advocate for? So making a personal connection is really, really interesting and a way to engage your audience. And some of that is when meeting with MPs, for example, speaking to the local or riding level really resonates. There are museums, cultural centers, heritage organizations, historical societies in almost every small town. That is a huge impact that this sector could have. And that resonates with politicians. And you can connect something to their riding. It can really resonate and you can appeal to them. Ask them, what's their favorite museum? Did they visit ones when they were, in their childhood with school trips? What are their memories? You'd be really surprised. Most people that I use that tactic with can point to something. Museums are things that everybody is familiar with and may have and have experience with. If you don't have the right message for the right audience, you could be wasting your time. So that's why I think upfront preparation is so important. Crafting your message. So this is always fun. It's easy to tell you to be clear and concise and use plain language, but try doing that when you are pulling together content from a huge group. Your first draft is going to be a manifesto of whatever you want to advocate about, but it's not the final product. And remember that. Once you've written down what you want to advocate about or for, you need to distill it down into exactly what your main ask is. And because people's attention span is shorter every day, we're seeing, short news clips. What we use and see and react to on social media is really short. That, what I want to say here is you don't need to try to be concise. Just don't spend all your time talking about your organization or the weather, is what I'm trying to say, I guess. People's attention is get to the crux of what you're advocating about. But there's a balance in being clear and concise and using plain language. You got to make sure everybody understands it, but it has to be elevated enough that it resonates with decision makers, with people in the field, with influencers. And if the message is simple but compelling enough with evidence, it will be repeated and people will take that information and also spread it for you. So that echo chamber type of comment from Heather really works. Using the same tone and language consistency is really important. I'm going to speed up a little bit because I know we want to have a bit of time for questions. But a couple things about crafting your message is when you have crafted your ask and your messages, develop a 30-second elevator pitch. So if you ended up in an elevator at a conference with a decision maker, you have maybe 50 and 30 seconds to tell them who you are, what you're about, and what you're advocating for. So that is a really important piece and tool that you can have in your back pocket. And always drive home your ask when you leave. You want to leave something behind so that they remember. And that is my phone. Apologies. There we go. So creating a visual or product to leave behind or attach to follow-up emails, really important. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. So right here, this is a one-pager that was done by the Ottawa Cultural Alliance this year in advocating for a few things with the Ottawa Council. So you'll see here that it is a document that has 3 big asks. They're bolded, and underneath you have key messages that provides the evidence for why we're asking for these things. So this is a really good example of, multiple organizations coming together, agreeing on what an ask is, and then fanning out to meet with counselors. We're all on the same page using the same document and the same messaging, and that has a lot of impact. And I'll point to something down here too. Overall, the quality of written communications will impact your reputation. So things that have typos and grammatical errors, that can be really cringy and detract from what you're trying to do. So it's important to make sure that your documents are really clean. Have your logos, your branding, everything in there. Repetition helps get the message across, and your logos and your brand and your color also really builds credibility over time. So while the message might change next year because we have a new priority or something, or we need to rejig, we look the same, our logos are the same, we're still connected and a united front. And city councilors who we're dealing with are very familiar now with this group. This is another one that was developed when I first joined the Ottawa Museum Network, that for budget 2022 this is pre-branding that I did with the OMN and has a lot of information. This was a manifesto. This is not what I'm advocating for today. It was good and it was needed at the time to demonstrate how the pandemic impacted us. But it was really text heavy. My most recent piece of leave behind when I meet with counselors is this. This is a simple infographic that shows, very clearly how much in-person visits are down. It gives facts and figures that the counselors were always interested in. What is our impact in the community? 350 volunteers, 10,000 volunteer hours. I mean, that's pretty significant. So I'm just going to skip ahead to this, which is all about speaking to the mind and appealing to the heart. And it's really, similar to what Heather was saying too. Effective messengers speak clearly and with passion, but they also have credibility because they have knowledge and they have experience. Sometimes you are the messenger, but sometimes an organization needs to pick the right messenger. You must be able to identify people who your target audience will connect with. They might admire, they command respect. They're personable. But on the flip side, there's potential for an unknown spokesperson. don't disregard that, because if an organization has a history of, combativeness or broken relationships, bringing in somebody new with fresh energy, perspectives, as a new spokesperson for your organization can really, really help. And in terms of arguments, just that, know that when you're writing your messaging and you're engaging with people, there's different ways of conveying your message, and you probably need to do a mix of them. There's the rational arguments, what are the academics saying? What do the trusted sources say? What are those reports, journal articles, statistics? What is all that is support out there that's supporting you, what you're advocating for? Cognitive, really another important piece. Having a call to action, clearly explaining to people you're advocating to what you want them to do and why. That is really, really important, especially when dealing with politicians and staffers and that kind of thing. And emotional, and that's what gets me every time. When meeting in person, speak from the heart. Captivate your audience by being authentic, honest, conversational, incorporate those stories. To me, the most authentic advocacy is when the speaker has that ability to use storytelling to articulate like a really important, complex issue. They sprinkle it with a bit of evidence and a heartfelt appeal, and in turn that inspires the room to be engaged, to listen, to maybe even start a dialogue, and to get involved in resolving whatever problem it is. I've also been in many rooms where the exact opposite has happened, where it's just crickets and, there's none of that heartfelt connection. So just in conclusion, as an advocate, you constantly want to connect with decision makers and influencers and make your advocacy be part of their life. So be seen, be heard, without being annoying. That's the key. But the connections and relationships that are built when advocating over time will play a vital role of achieving results. We know advocacy is not a one and done situation. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I thought that this was a really interesting and another facet of advocacy that people could learn from today. So thank you. And I'm now going to get out of here and pass it back to my moderator. And this is, just before I leave, this infographic that I created around advocacy communications is my aid to you. So I like to leave something behind so you remember the presentation and what I was trying to convey, just like when I go out and meet people to advocate on behalf of Ottawa's museums. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Excellent. Wow. Excellent. Great ideas and guidance on how to advocate, and a great compliment to Michael and Heather's conversations with us. I'm going to look at the Q&A box. Nope, nothing there yet, but I'm going to start with something that actually all three of you, well, a couple of you said it outright, and everybody else hinted at, was that advocacy needs to be incorporated into the strategic plan, and by extension into a social media plan that Heather was talking about, and into other policies that are board approved. Because if we don't incorporate and codify the need for advocacy in our policies and in our planning, it won't happen. It will not happen consistently. And your thoughts on how to get advocacy codified and incorporated into our policies and plans? Who would like to take that one on?
I just really want to thank you for bringing up the role of the board, because they are partially advocates for you, but also depending on who's on your board, if you don't have those policies in place, it can be a really dangerous place to be as a staff person. And so it's really important when you're at the point where you have a board. I hate even using the word progressive. I hate these words. Like, I'm like, it's not progressive. It's like a board that cares about other human beings. Very progressive of them. Again, I'm a bit sarcastic these days. but like, it's really, really important to make sure that you get that in place, because like, it takes a while to change. I mean, you can change policy, but it takes time. So if you get that in place when you have a board that's quote unquote more progressive, then it helps to protect the staff who are there right now and who might come afterwards. So yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned the role of the board, because they're super, super important in our work.
Yeah, and it's very important. I know Michael and I have worked with OMA policies and bylaws, et cetera. It's very important to work with the board and make sure that everything is board approved, so that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and not just for CMOG, not just for PHO grant applications, not just because of the accounting or the audit. It's because it's the right thing to do to guide an organization. In the Bytown Museum, we also did a social media plan that guided us through that. And the thing about policies, and then I'm going to pass it back over to you, is we have to keep up with them. The world changes very, very quickly. Technology, Heather, you went through everything from AI to X, and everything changes on a dime. And we have got to keep our policies and our strategic thinking and our strategic plans up to date with the new technology, but also with what's happening in the community, socially, culturally, politically, and economically. And Sarah, you were going to say something, and I will stop talking.
Oh, just that same thing when we're talking about the board, you know, you're preparing stuff for your advocacy, but they are advocates as well. And what you prepare the same things for them. You get them all on the same page, all singing from the same song sheet, the same key messages in all these different places, different meetings. Over time, you will make progress. You will move that bar, but you need to have everybody on the same page with really good messaging and what you're trying to achieve. Yeah. And codifying it in the policies, really, really good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At Bytown, we did a cheat sheet with the 30-second elevator thing, and made it in a little thing that they could put in their back pockets to whip out when they were in the elevator. So, and I
would suggest they memorize it.
They laughed, but it was effective, right? It got the point across. To your point, everybody has to sing from the same song sheet at the same time, and hopefully in the same harmony and
you
melody.
Never know who you're going to run into, right? And that was the thing, as we're out there, like I was at the National Trust Conference last month, and I know I saw Heather there. I didn't even have a chance to go over and talk, but I talked to so many people. And yeah, I needed that 30-second elevator pitch about who I am and where I come from and why I was there. And once I had that in my mind, I must have repeated the same thing a few tables. You know, you're doing the intros around the tables, but because I did that pre-work and said, okay, I need to be prepared and be able to articulate what I'm doing here, what I'm trying to achieve, or what am I trying to learn? Am I trying to listen? All these kinds of things.
Yeah. Michael? Any comment?
Just that I think for us was a big, huge step in that direction of getting Rainbow registered, was really looking and going through all of our policies and reassessing to ensure that we were realigning for what was current. And so that certainly helped us with moving that forward and ensuring then the board was on the same page.
Yeah, it's a great tool for, it's a great governance tool as well as a great advocacy tool in its own right. Another question that that's come up is, if a museum and a gallery or a heritage organization wants to start being better advocates in and for their communities, where would you suggest they take their first step? How would they kickstart their advocacy process, campaign, etc.? So who would like to kickstart that one?
I can start if you like.
Go for it, Michael.
For me, it's starting conversations with community is kind of the first step. Welcoming them and starting those conversations is really important, because then you start to learn from them how they want to be involved or how they want to see themselves within your organization and within the community. So I think it's starting conversations first, and then working from there.
And the preparation, going back to what I said, like the preparation, yes, building the relationships, but what are you advocating for? So at one point you're building these relationships, you're talking to people, you need to put, like I said, you need to distill that down into what is the ask? What are you trying to get from people? And that takes work up front before you start going out and just meeting with people. So there's kind of like meet with people, build relationships, but when you need to like really, really advocate and you're getting into more formal situations, make sure that you've planned it out and that you have what you want to communicate. And having those relationships where you can pull on other people's experiences and incorporate that, and it's going to be more successful for sure.
Another question that came, now this is in the Q&A box. How do we maintain our resilience and optimism during an often long and slow process of advocacy?
Stubbornly.
Pardon?
I said stubbornly, which I'm kind of joking, but I'm not really.
It's true. We got to be stubborn here, persistent and consistent and just downright stubborn.
I tell people that I'm like vindictive in really positive ways. And I feel like this is both a personal statement and a professional one. Anytime I've been through a bad relationship, my way of dealing with it after was to better myself and to be like, well, so there. And I feel like that's how I approach my professional life too, is like, all right, then you don't expect us to be really good at this. We're going to go out and we're going to do it. And that's my, more than anything, is I guess an attitude statement. But I mean it, right? Like, and the other thing is talking to other people about it, knowing that you're not alone, because there's times when this feels so lonely. And when you feel like you're the only person whose roof is leaking, trust me, you're not. You are too. And so I think that's important too, is just building those informal networks as well to support you really in like just having someone else to talk to who gets it.
And well, that's what I find. So I find the conversations and connecting with each other and commiserating together so that you can support each other and laugh about it, because otherwise you'll get like, it just can eat up and build if you can't have someone to go over it with. But it's also I echo Heather in the fact that when some people said, why are you flying that flag? It should be just up in June, or there's some concern around that. Then I go bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm like, no, if you challenge it, then it needs to be there even more and in a permanent way. Because that's kind of how I am as a person. I'm like, if you question or challenge in a negative against something that's really positive, then you're just going to see it get bigger and more prominent in the community.
I'd just like to add, celebrate the small wins. Celebrate when you got that face-to-face meeting with the Minister of Heritage, for example, or their staffers who will report in, but celebrate those wins when we actually, the Ottawa Cultural Alliance had a great win where we influenced the term of council priorities, where culture wasn't and heritage wasn't anywhere. And we put full court press. And once we saw 2 motions come to the floor to put culture back into priorities, that was a win. So we celebrate it, and that's energizing for the next time. But there is going to be times where you're just like, wow, was that a waste of time? But, celebrate those small wins, because that will get you through.
Heather had to leave because she is also hosting the other event at her museum, but please join me in thanking Heather for her amazing presentation, and I will email her our thanks. Cody, I lost your question, so I'm going to go on to another one. If you want to re-put it back into the Q&A, go for it, Cody. Another question is, how best can we collaborate and bring aligned organizations into our advocacy efforts? And another, well, as part of that is, what organizations do you look to who are excellent advocates?
Maybe I'll just mention, so in Ottawa, we have a network of the Ottawa Cultural Alliance. So we have people represented from festivals, the galleries, museums, and some other heritage organizations. And we've been able to organize ourselves in a way that we work together to come up with the culture counts piece that I showed you online. So sometimes it means pulling together people within your sector and maybe that and a little outside too, to work collaboratively on something. And what's great then is all these organizations fan out. We have an impact on all of those boards. We're arming all these different people in these organizations with information and key messages and things that we want, that we're advocating about. So if my fantastic board member, Madeleine Mayer, who used to be, you know, Minister of Heritage and Culture, sorry, in the province, you know, she knows what we're doing from a Cultural Alliance perspective. I leveraged her and her networks to reach out to the Mayor of Ottawa and had her send, you know, our Culture Counts document to him and request a meeting. So I leveraged a different way, but again, it was a document that was created as a group and being used by different organizations. So, you know, there's more power in numbers, basically, in that sense. But I've also advocated on my own and on behalf of museums. But you definitely can have a bigger impact when you're collaborating with others.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Even though we're just a tad over time, I would like to, Cody has graciously reinstated his question. In terms of community building over social media, etc., does anyone have any advice for building an audience and making people care when they are not part of your community? We are 20 plus hours away from the GTA, Greater Toronto Area, or Ottawa, and an hour to 2 hours away from the next closest museum, but want to connect with other museums and institutions. I think that's basically, how do we advocate when we're separated physically? Communicate via distance.
I think there's a role for the OMA in that sense to bring us together, right? In a way, I know that the regional networks come together and we talk about a lot of the same issues that we're all facing, and looking for those opportunities to collaborate. I have made connections through the regional network where I'm now invite people from different parts of the province to participate in some of our training and reach out and talk to them and build relationships with them, even though we're not in the same city. So I do feel like there's things that you can do, but also OMA, CMA, those kinds of big associations. I also am looking to them to play a role for our sector in advocating and arming all of us in all these communities and museums and organizations with the information we need to support the OMA in, you know, whatever, lobbying for more CMOC money or, you know, all this kind of stuff. So I really think that there's different roles for different levels. So the personal or individual, smaller groups, but the associations have a role as well. And I want to be an advocate for what the OMA stands for and what the OMA is trying to do. But I need the information and I need to be engaged in the development of that kind of advocacy materials.
And I think that's why over the last 7 or 10 months that the OMA has indeed connected with, you know, the other provincial museum and territorial associations.
And the CMA bringing back Hill Day, like we're starting to see
and doing
coordinated efforts.
Yep, redeveloping their advocacy program. And also why this fall series of workshops is open to everybody across Canada. It is for exactly that reason. So the OMA is starting to take those steps. But all three levels of government also have a role. They have to become far more supportive of the organizations and far more sensitive to the needs. So it's a very complex, complicated situation. And Michael, you were going to say something, and I will stop talking.
I was just going to say that one of my inspirations has been the City of Toronto museums and the work they've done on BIPOC, and that really resonated, and that's where a conversation started about 2SLGI plus, and a conversation with Cheryl Blackman and the City of Toronto museums, and yeah, so that was one of my inspirations.
Yeah, excellent. So I'm just going to check to see if there's any more questions in the Q&A box. I don't see any. And I know that we are a bit over time. So on that note, I want to thank Heather, and we will email her to thank her. And Michael, thank you very, very much for your insight and your strong advocacy in your community. And thank you, Sarah, for your informative and strong presentation on communication and how to communicate, as well as for strongly answering the questions. So thank you very, very much, all of you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. And it is being recorded, so you can access it once it's up on the OMA's website and review all of this. And I also want to thank you very much for joining us for all of the workshops and panel discussions since September the 21st, right through to today. And on behalf of the board of the OMA, on behalf of the staff of the OMA and myself, thank you, but also please enjoy a joy-filled and a happy holiday season, and be safe and happy holiday season. Take care, everybody, and thank you for joining us, and we'll talk soon.